while we're preaching. I expected that to be younger people, but not you.
I don't even like to text, so don't text me.
Colossians chapter 3, we'll look at verses 18 through 4:1. Colossians chapter 3, verses 18 through chapter 4, verse 1. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, that is fit in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and be not bitter against them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service, as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God, and whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord, and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Jesus Christ. But he that doeth wrong shall receive for the wrong which he hath done, and there is no respect of persons. Masters, give unto your servants that which is just and equal, knowing that ye also have a master in heaven. And we've been dealing with family worship, how we've been making a biblical case for family worship. We've dealt with it in the Old Testament. Now we're jumping into the New Testament. And as we begin to examine the New Testament, we've often mentioned a lot of older writers to help us understand some things as far as with regards to family worship. And they would often call Jesus and his disciples family. Now, we can ask the question, why would they ask or say that Jesus and his disciples were family? You can comment, that's okay. Why would some people think that Jesus and the disciples were family?
They traveled together, ate together.
Okay, traveled together, ate together, but there was a particular incident with the Pharisees, right? And Jesus tells them, they interrupt him while he's teaching. They say, where's your mother and your brothers and your sisters are here? What does he say? These are my family. And with the regularity of thinking about that in context, if you begin to think through them as family, then what do they often do together as family?
Pray and worship.
Pray. Luke 9:18, and it came to pass as he was alone praying, his disciples were with him, and he asked them, saying, whom say the people that I am? Luke 11:1, and it came to pass that as he was praying in a certain place, when he ceased, one of his disciples said unto him, Lord, teach us to pray, as John also taught his disciples. And Jesus taught them privately. Mark 4:34, Jesus began to teach them, and it says there, he expounded all things to his disciples when they were alone. If you recall back to our studies in the book of Matthew, the disciples, after many parables, Peter asked Jesus, declare unto us this parable. Mark 13:3-4, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, tell us when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled? Now if you think of it in the aspect of family, right, they're praying together. Jesus is the head of the family, so to speak. He's teaching them. It's a pattern intended for us to see as an example that we might pray with the members of our own family. Apostle Paul refers to 3 times the churches that meet in private houses. Romans chapter 15, verse 5. Now the God of patience and consolation grant you to be like-minded one toward another according to Christ Jesus. 1 Corinthians 16:19. The churches of Asia salute you. Aquila and Priscilla salute you much in the Lord with the church that is in their house. Colossians 4:15. Salute the brethren which are in Laodicea and Nymphas and the church which is in his house. And to Philemon 2, and to our beloved Apphia and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and to the church in thy house. And Palmer cites these texts as giving evidence that the early Christian organizations were formed within the enclosure of the family. You also see it in Acts with Cornelius and his family, right? Acts chapter 10, verse 2. A devout man and one that feared God with all his house, which gave much alms to the people and prayed to God always. You see that again in Acts 10:30. When you think about it, and one that feared God with all his house. It wasn't that just Cornelius feared God, but Cornelius feared God with all his house. Doesn't say because of, in spite of, it says with. Meaning that he made sure that him and his family worship God. When you think about it, we read in Colossians chapter 3, verses 18 through 4:1, talking about the family, right? Wives and husbands and children and fathers dealing with children and masters and servants. Then you get to Colossians chapter 4, verse 2. It says, continue in prayer. Context gives you the idea that it's talking with family, right? If he's just telling you that husbands love your wives, wives submit to your husbands, children love the children, continue in prayer and watch in the same with thanksgiving. Families are to continue steadfastly in prayer.
Perhaps none of the above would be possible
Okay.
without prayer.
Right.
So it just goes to show, because of the context that it is in, you would think that it would be regarding fathers.
Right.
It requires prayer to behave that way.
Right. And so I think we missed the point. I think we see it disjointed a lot of times, talking about where we got the family, then all of a sudden we get back to prayer. But prayer should be found in the family. Colossians chapter 4, verse 2. It's interesting also, if you go to 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1 through 7, Peter is talking about wives being subjected to your own husbands, and deals with the family as well. Likewise, ye husbands, verse 7, dwell with them according to knowledge, give honor unto his wife as unto the weaker vessel. As one writer says, family disorders hinder family prayer. Peter is acknowledging and assuming that prayer is happening within the family. I mean, if you think about it, just general duties, we often think, though, there's commandments to the individual, but should they not also be commandments to the family and maybe not even to the church as well? Hebrews 3:13, but exhort one another daily. Should we not want to exhort each other in our own household? A lot of times we think of it as within the church, but should we not want to build up? Make sure that our spouse, our children are doing what they're supposed to be doing? He goes on to say, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Should we not, as Christians, want what we want in the church, and we want people to come up to us and say, look, there's something within your life you may not understand, you may not see, but this is what's going on, this is how I see it. Should we not be doing that to the same people in our family?
I think it is all too easy to just think of it in context of the church. That is what we do at church. But it really just struck me now about the fact that none of the relational aspects can happen without praying for it to happen.
Right. But if we're not even doing it in our own house, why would we be expected to do it in the church? Right? If we're not exhorting, if we're not trying to help people in their Christian life in the house, what's the expectation we're going to do it at church? With people who we don't know as well as the people in the house. Paul says in Romans chapter 15, verse 14, "And I myself also am persuaded of you, my brethren, that ye also are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, able also to admonish one another." Yes, we get it that he's writing to the church at Rome, but could we not say that I want my spouse, my children to be filled with goodness, filled with all knowledge, and able to admonish one another? Should you not want that in your own household as well? I mean, you look to Colossians chapter 3. We've mentioned this several times when it comes with regards to how we look at music and hymns around here. Colossians 3:16 tells us, "And let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord." How much more then, as one writer says, is it our duty to teach, admonish, and exhort our own families? I mean, think about it. Are we not supposed to pray for one another as Christians? Should we then not pray for one another as members of our own household? James chapter 5:16, "Confess your faults one to another and pray for one another, that you may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much." We sing at church. Should we not be able to sing at home? Colossians 3:16 again, and Ephesians 5:19. Are we not supposed to give thanks in everything in church? Why can't we do it at home? 1 Thessalonians 5:17 and 18. You see in Philippians 4:6, "Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God." Continue in prayer and watch in the same with thanksgiving. Now, Davis exclaims, "The case is so plain, you need no time to deliberate. Of course, families should pray and sing praises together." And he even asks an interesting question. What intelligent Christian will disagree? He goes on to say, "If you are determined to resist convictions and live in willful neglect of this duty," talking about all of the list of duties that we have just said, which we often take with regards to the church, and we should also take with regards to the family. If you are determined to resist convictions and live in willful neglect of this duty, your families are like to be nurseries for hell. And then he says, "I must discharge the artillery of heaven against you." Ephesians 6:4, Paul is admonishing the fathers in particular. "And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." It's interesting, if you look at the idea of the nurture and admonition of the Lord, the idea of instruction and teaching, uses it in the same example just a few books back, or a few epistles back, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, where he says, "Now all these things happened unto them for ensamples," talking about the Old Testament. "And they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come." Well, let's ask the question, what is admonition tonight? If I'm to admonish you, the Bible tells us to nurture and admonition. If I'm to admonish you, what is that?
Encouraging. It's more than, are you asking a question?
Yes, I'm asking a question. Yep, you're right. So it's encouraging, but I think it's a little bit more pointed than that.
Strongly something. Urging.
Did you say strongly threatening?
No, I said strongly urging.
It's like, that's a little bit more pointed.
No, Rich did the strongly.
Strongly encouraging.
No, scratch the encouraging. Do urging.
Do urging. The definition of admonishment, the act of reminding one of his faults or duties. The act of reminding one of his faults or duties. It's hard because we don't want to interact with somebody and tell them this is where you are wrong. Because how many of us would jump down the throat of that person who tells us that? Should we not be nurturing and admonishing our children? It's interesting, we're much willing to do that to our children. We may be even willing to do it to somebody else's children. But for whatever reason, I mean, let's take it into the church for a moment. We're much less willing to do that to people in the church. They are to be thoroughly instructed, so that they are to be brought to knowledge, self-control, and obedience. Parents, and in particular fathers, are to teach their children the things of God. Thomas Lice talks about nurturing. He says it should be nurtured not only in the arts and sciences to make them worldly wise and learned, nor only in the mysteries of trading and worldly employment to make them rich, nor only in matters of morality and civil honesty to make them sober and virtuous, but they must be nurtured in the mysteries of true religion. Obviously making the point that that should be the most important. It's true religion. We've concluded, if you think about the Old Testament way of transmitting Bible knowledge, transmitting knowledge about God, it was from one generation to the other. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But really the divine method, even in the New Testament, is for fathers in particular, but families, to teach their children God's Word. Who God is, what God has done, what God is doing, and how are we to live in light of that fact. Henry says our great care must be to lodge our religion, the great deposit, pure and entire, in the hands of those who succeed us. We must, almost as if we're taking it to the bank and giving it to our children, as this is the most precious thing that we have. Learn of it, seek it, know it, love it. For this is our duty as parents. The family is at the center of God's kingdom program. Is it any wonder why the devil wants to destroy the family today? Because if you destroy the family, you destroy the continuation and succession of God's program. And obviously we know that God will not allow that to happen. But we should not want it to happen either, or be neglectful in allowing it to happen. I mean, are we not, as families, obligated to thank God, to confess our sin to God, to seek His help and care? Because there are daily cases, as Haywood suggests, occasions and necessities that require families to be presented to the Lord. There are family sins to be confessed, wants to be enumerated, mercies to be desired, cares and crosses to be removed, fears to be prevented, temptations to be resisted, duties to be performed, graces to be exercised, peace to be maintained or regained, passions to be suppressed, mercies to be acknowledged, and all these must be laid at God's feet in daily prayer. There's a rare family which hath not some prodigal son or carnal soul as a member of it. Somebody sick in it, or some child disposed of in marriage, or to employ in some occupation, some doubts or difficulties that call for prayer, wherein the whole family is concerned. Or if there be no such exigency at present, yet who knows how soon any of those, or all of these might light upon a family, And what remedy is there like family prayer? George Whitefield would say, "Must not your conscience presently tell you it is fit that persons who receive so many mercies together should acknowledge them together?" If you think about it, if we are experiencing life together as a family, my family, your family, the psalmist tells us that God's mercies are new every morning. And if the psalmist is telling us that God's mercies are new every morning, should we then not acknowledge that that is happening as a family? We must do it on a daily basis on a personal level, but should we not do it as a family? Should we not, in a family capacity, acknowledge who God is and thank Him? There are no families, George Whitefield goes on to say, but what have some common blessings of which they have been all partakers, to give thanks for. Some common crosses and afflictions which they are to pray against. Some common sins which they are all to lament and bewail. So he asks, if you think about it, how can this be done without joining together in one common act of humiliation, supplication, and thanksgiving? Family prayer is a great and necessary duty. Family worship is also a most proper and effective way of teaching one's children the Christian faith. It isn't the only way, but is the most proper and effective way. Many of the things that we expect the church to do, but for whatever reason we have failed to expect the family to do as well. If we are to have strong families here at our church, should we not then want our children to grow up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? We'll end there. Thank you for joining us by way of Facebook. Any questions, comments, or concerns this evening?